strange. You know those moments where the world just kind of glitches? And for a split second, you see something that just shouldn't be there. A glimpse of a time that's long, long gone?
So, picture this. You're walking down a street you know like the back of your hand. You could walk it with your eyes closed, right? But then, something shifts. In the blink of an eye, the familiar asphalt is gone, replaced by old cobblestones. The modern cars, poof, vanished. Now there are vintage models puttering by, and everyone around you is suddenly dressed in clothes from, say, 50 years ago.
You haven't moved an inch, but suddenly the question isn't where you are, it's when you are. And that's a pretty terrifying thought. This is what people call a time slip.
Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like something straight out of the movies. But here's the thing. There's no time machine, no flashing lights, no DeLorean involved. For the people who claim this has happened to them, it's totally spontaneous, it's uncontrolled, and you can imagine it's incredibly unsettling.
And people report these glitches in reality from all over the world. But there seems to be one place, one city, where the past doesn't just whisper, it screams. That city is Liverpool, England. And believe it or not, one specific street seems to be ground zero for this whole bizarre phenomenon.
So let's head over to Liverpool and talk about the enigma of Bold Street. This is a place where the past and present don't just, coexist. They seem to slam into each other, constantly and completely at random.
I mean, there are tons of stories, but a few really stand out and cemented this street's reputation. You've got Frank, an off-duty cop back in '96. Then there's Sean, a shoplifter in 2006 who, well, let's just say he got a lot more than he bargained for. And even a teenager named Imogen in 2011, who somehow went shopping in a store that hadn't existed for years. But the one story that really kicked this whole thing off is Frank's. And what's so fascinating is that he was a cop, a guy trained to observe, to stick to the facts. That's what makes his account so compelling. The sheer level of detail he remembered, details that could actually be checked.
So Frank says he saw this old-timey van zip past with the name Cardin's on the side. Turns out, Cardin's was a real Liverpool company back in the day. He was heading to a Dillon's bookshop to meet his wife. But where the bookstore should have been, there was a women's clothing shop called Cripps. And when he looked it up later, you guessed it, Cripps was in that exact spot in the 1950s. So we're not talking about random fuzzy images. These were concrete, historically accurate details.
But here's the kicker, the part that gives me chills. As Frank is standing there, totally bewildered, he sees a young woman, also in modern clothes, looking just as confused as he is. They both step towards the door of Cripps, and as they cross the threshold, bam, it's the Dillon's bookshop again. The woman turns to him and says, "Did you see that? I thought it was a new shop, and now it's a bookshop." He wasn't the only one. He had a witness.
Okay, so this begs the million-dollar question, right? How on earth could something like this happen? Is time itself really that fragile? Well, the explanations, they get pretty wild.
When you start digging, you find the theories basically fall into two big camps. On one side, you've got the paranormal stuff, unseen forces, mysterious energies, that kind of thing. And on the other side, you've got explanations that are actually rooted in the super weird, mind-bending world of theoretical physics.
Let's start with the paranormal side. A lot of these ideas are all about energy. Some people talk about telluric currents, which are these natural electrical currents in the Earth's crust. Others point to ley lines, these hypothetical energy lines that supposedly connect ancient sites, and what do you know, they all happen to converge on Bold Street. A really popular one is that the Underground Railway, with all its high-voltage rails, is creating some kind of time vortex. The only problem with that last one, the map people use to prove it, well, it's not actually a real map of the area. It's just a schematic.
But then you jump over to the science side and things get just as strange, honestly. I mean, Einstein himself showed us that time isn't constant. It can be stretched and squeezed. That's time dilation. Then you've got theories about wormholes, actual shortcuts through space-time. Or maybe, just maybe, it's about quantum mechanics and the idea that parallel universes could kind of bleed into each other for a second, catching people in the middle.
And look, all of that is absolutely fascinating stuff. It pushes the boundaries of what we even think is possible. But what if there's another explanation? A much simpler one. What if the answer isn't out there in the universe, but in here, inside our own heads? What if the glitch isn't in reality, but in our perception of reality?
This brings us to a whole different way of looking at it. A psychologist named Dr. Ciaran O'Keefe makes a compelling case that the slip might not be in time at all, but in the mind. He thinks the answer could be a lot more personal, something rooted in how our brains actually work.
So, Dr. O'Keefe breaks it down into 4 main psychological ideas. First up, our perception is just really fragile. Things like being tired or scared or even super excited can actually distort what we see and cause hallucinations. Second, our brains make mistakes. You might see one little thing, like a vintage car, and your brain, through something called confirmation bias, just invents the rest of the old-timey scene to match. Third, think about daydreams. Our minds can slip into these altered states where imagination and reality get completely mixed up. And fourth, and this is interesting, strong electromagnetic fields, say from an underground railway, have been shown to affect the part of the brain that can trigger hallucinations. Sounds familiar, right?
Okay, so with that psychological toolkit in mind, let's go back and look at some of the most famous time slip cases. Because when you do, the stories start to look a whole lot different.
Let's take that classic Versailles case from 1901 with the 2 academics who supposedly saw Marie Antoinette. Well, it turns out they didn't say anything was weird for months after it happened, their own notes didn't even match up, and key details got added to the story years later. Or how about the vanishing hotel in France? The story has changed every time it's been told, and there's not a shred of physical evidence. And that New York City diner story? That's pretty much a well-known urban legend. There's no proof the guy in the story ever even existed.
And that brings us right back to Bold Street. Look, the stories are incredible, they really are, but at the end of the day, that's what they are. Stories. They're powerful personal anecdotes for sure, but there's no hard, verifiable evidence for any of them. What probably happens is that a strange feeling, maybe a misremembered detail, gets told and retold, and over time it morphs into this powerful local legend. And at that point, it becomes really, really hard to separate the facts from the fiction.
So, where does that leave us? Are time slips real, cracks in the very fabric of reality, giving us these incredible little peeks into the past? Or are they just revealing the cracks in our own perception, showing us just how fascinating and honestly sometimes how fragile our own minds can be? And maybe the most interesting question isn't, is it real? Maybe the real question is why we love these stories so much, why they stick around. Perhaps they tell us less about the past and a whole lot more about our own fascination with it.